continue this third block with a panel that is going to focus on cross-chain liquidity. So I would like to invite my co-panelists to join. So we have Christian from BlendSafe, have Raphael from Arrakis Finance, Gorazd from Helix, and FITZY from dapp protocol. Just to give a bit of context of what we're going to talk in this panel, as we're seeing this scalability approaches that various ecosystems are taking, scalability comes with a trade-off. And that trade-off is more often than not the fact that liquidity becomes scattered across various ecosystems, be it L2s, be it even different L1s. And that makes it difficult, one, from a user perspective, to have access to your own funds, which can be on different chains because you've interacted with different type of applications. But it's also about the user experience and bringing what is already discussed quite a lot, the famous interoperability. So with my co-panelists today, we're going to explore how liquidity looks like today, how silos look like regarding liquidity, what can be done about it, and how chain fusion fits into this liquidity narrative. So first of all, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. And I would like to invite you to introduce yourselves and to tell us a bit about what you're working on and what you're building.
Okay, I can start. Hello. I'm Christian from Deep Ventures. We're a venture studio that's incubating startups in the Web3 space. We love ICP and chain fusion quite a bit, mainly for obviously the cross-chain narrative and the technology around it. And we are building BlendSafe on top of it. So BlendSafe is an omni-chain wallet. You can think of it like a cross-chain, the safe, to put it simply. But it has a twist that we have this pre-authorized blocks that you can use, like swapping a token, bridging it to another chain, put it into a protocol and something like that. And then you can use these small building blocks like Lego and build bigger protocols on top of it. And yeah, some of those are on this table, so we can do things like swapping on Helix or using Bitcoin exposure and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm happy to tell you more later.
Yeah, I'm Raphael. I'm representing Arrakis Finance. We're a decentralized market maker operating cross-chain, providing liquidities for projects. We basically help projects to operate on concentrated liquidity AMMs, launching the token, but also after the token launch have deep liquidity, low slippage, and enable the community to trade the token at the best price.
My name is Gorazd. I'm one of the co-founders of Helix Markets. We're a decentralized exchange using chain fusion technology to seamlessly trade assets between different ecosystems. So, if you want to trade your favorite Ethereum tokens against your favorite ICP tokens, we enable that in a very seamless way without any bridges or any kind of third-party intermediation. It's just order book trading and settlement on native chains.
Hey, I'm FITZY. I think I'm the sort of odd one out. So I represent dapp protocol, and we're building on Bitcoin. We're an L1 DeFi and dapp enabling protocol. People think, okay, you can't do DeFi and dapps on L1, and that's a fair point. You can, but you need to do it in a very different way to what L2s are doing. The execution needs to be different, but the actual end product can be the same. I think we believe smart contracts to be one thing, and that's usually EVM. And so we've just partnered with Chain Fusion, ICP and Chain Fusion about 6-7 weeks ago. And again, same sort of story, just to open up these other chains, open up these silos of liquidity and data, and just bring them all together. So yeah, that's what we're doing on Bitcoin.
Thank you very much for the introductions. So let's maybe start a bit from the problem statement. Is the future of DeFi actually, is there a future for DeFi in its current state with, I don't know how many L1s, I don't know how many L2s, we're talking about app chains now, apps building specifically on L3 or whatever, where users interact, hold part of the liquidity. Sometimes going from an L2 to L1 can take up to a week, so on and so forth. Is there something really sustainable in how DeFi looks like today?
I mean, I can start, probably everyone could start, but I can give my 2 thoughts about it. I mean, the landscape has changed quite a bit since I entered the space. So at the beginning, there was always this one chain that says I'm going to be the success of Ethereum because I'm more scalable, I can serve more users, and there was always this idea that there will be a winner-takes-it-all chain, and that it's not how the space looks today. So we have a lot of, everyone and their mother does the EVM rollup nowadays, and we have a lot of chain, just as you said. And basically, if you launch a chain, you need to have some kind of DeFi infrastructure. So if you don't have liquidity and you don't have, I don't know, at least Uniswap or something like that launched on your chain, then you don't have an ecosystem. And the problem that occurs from that is that the liquidity of these different chains is spread across all the ecosystems. And I'm always telling this one anecdote that I read in a book from traditional finance, which is very, very funny. The book is called Flash Boys, and it tells a story about a fund that's basically pitching the story of building a fiber cable from the New York Stock Exchange to the Chicago Futures Exchange. And when they started doing it, the network latency between those exchanges was 17 milliseconds. And they pitched that they bring it down to 13. So they said, oh, if there's a house in between, we buy it and tear it down. If there's a mountain, we blow it away. If there's a sea, we dry it up. We bring it down by 4 milliseconds, which is ridiculously close to the physical minimum. And the only reason for that was that they wanted to bring down the arbitrage opportunities between those exchanges. And that's like how committed traditional finance is to overcome silos between different trading venues. And the reason is that every time you have arbitrage opportunities, then people are going to take these arbitrage opportunities instead of investing into real products. And we actually need people that invest, I don't know, in companies that fight cancer or capture carbon. But instead, if there's arbitrage opportunities, people are going to take them because it's riskless. And the same thing is occurring now in basically multi-chain environments. You have all these different chains, and some of them have deep liquidity, and then liquidity starts concentrating there because it doesn't make sense to deploy it somewhere else. And if people start deploying it somewhere else, and people are starting to become arbitrageurs between it and trading one token for the other. And so basically, in order to overcome this state, there needs to be some common abstraction around chains to unify this liquidity again. That's at least my...
Yeah, I think I wasn't even going to go into that much detail. I mean, that was a great explanation. I was going to say to the question, is there a future for how it stands now? And the answer is, yeah, we just continue. But the question is, do we want that? Do we want to continue to have this much friction? Do we continue to have to build different pieces of connective tissue and connective infrastructure to be able to do that? And it's just not cost efficient to do that. And so ultimately, I'm absolutely 100% confident personally, and TAP as well, that a multi-chain environment enabled by things like chain fusion it needs to happen as soon as possible. I'm quite passionate about it, so I'll stop myself. But yeah, there absolutely is a future now, but I don't want that particular future.
I would also very much agree with, like, there is a future that is multi-chain, and we already see that different chains sort of have different user types. And also when you look at trading volume, we very much as a market maker see that there's different order flow, different size trading volume on different chains. The biggest challenge I see for the future of multi-chain DeFi really is fragmentation of liquidity, and how can we overcome this will be the major challenge to move forward to the next step of DeFi.
Yeah, I would say, like, in current form, no for DeFi, just because I think, one thing crypto does really every cycle is basically copy-paste to death. So everybody's copy-pasting the same model of how to acquire liquidity, what to do, and, everyone keeps doing it until it doesn't work anymore. And now we've reached a situation where you have, like, 300 different protocols competing for basically the same pool of users. And at some point, all these fragmentalizations has completely killed DeFi because everybody just rolls out the same solution on the same layer XYZ, right? And it just leads to a situation where it's non-sustainable. And I mean, we can see it right now. There was a dip in the market, like Bitcoin dipped 30%, Ethereum dipped 30%. Like, what did your alt bags dip? Like, everybody's alt bags are down like 50 to 80%. And then there's a reason for that, right? It's because it's non-sustainable. Like Bitcoin and Ethereum are fine. They got their ETFs, they got institutional flows, they got really good liquidity. You know, those two assets and ecosystems are fine, but everybody else is you know, in terms of DeFi is struggling. So now the technology is actually there, not to think about, you know, building new layers or building bridges, but chains that can talk to each other. And with that, like, you can utilize the liquidity where it is. You don't have to move it over, and you can mix and match and trade it against each other without the need for, you know, breaking it down and having, like, you know, a couple of 100K here, a couple of 100K there, and everybody can just like move around millions.
Yeah, I think that I think there were a couple of interesting points, and I'll get to the points with that you made about arbitrage in a bit. But before that, I think there's. I think we're moving towards like from this concept of everybody competes for the same liquidity, and again, I really liked your point about like going from that narrative where one chain has to rule them all to, okay, let's make liquidity flow seamlessly. But there was the I think, Raphael, you mentioned liquidity silos. Kind of where do you see liquidity being parked the most? And I'm sure that FITZY would like to chime in on this one as well. But which are the main liquidity silos that we see in the DeFi ecosystem nowadays?
I mean, liquidity is really sticky. Like, liquidity doesn't move. You really need to bring in incentives for liquidity to move. So most of the liquidity we see nowadays is still stuck on mainnet. We're working with a lot of protocols to bring protocol-owned liquidity. That's more flexible because then the protocol itself or the DAO behind the protocol can direct the liquidity where it should flow. I think that's one option of the future, to have protocol-owned liquidity and then build up that that liquidity. Yeah. Coming back to the question, where do we see most liquidity? I think in the EVM ecosystem, it's still largely on mainnet, and then retail liquidity is more on more gas-efficient chains.
But since you mentioned protocol-owned liquidity, doesn't that have a bit of a bad rep since Olympus DAO?
I lost a lot of money there. I just want to add one interesting point. So because I changed my opinion on that quite a bit. So a year or 2 years ago, I was always thinking like, so capital isn't loyal or something like that. It just goes where the most yield is coming from. And this turned out, as you said rightly, to be not true. So currently, like, Uniswap has basically taken it over. And they did so by just pure innovation. So they have a huge engineering team. And now Uniswap V4 is coming up. It's super exciting. And they're basically now totally dominating the market, which is not like what I thought when the, like, I remember I always think like Polygon is like this, or Binance Swap. So these were the first ignitions of like multi-chain world, because it was the first time when all these people who don't have millions of money to move around, but just a few bucks, and they could start using things like a pancake swap, and I don't remember what this Dragon Swap or something like that was called on Polygon, I don't remember. But it looked like that back then, that everyone, there's now someone forking Uniswap and saying, oh, we mint additional token on top of it, you get some more yield and the capital is flowing there. But that's not at all the case. So currently it's siloed mostly on EVM and mostly on Uniswap pools. And for some reasons, rightfully so, because they're the biggest innovation drivers in the space. There's also another liquidity silo.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you frame it like that I'm going to come in and just say Bitcoin, 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 Bitcoin. I'm not a Bitcoin maxi. I'm kind of a blockchain maxi, a decentralized maxi. And so, again, like how you frame it, I know you're joking, but I don't see it as, oh, if we, an L1 protocol like dapp can bridge to the liquidity elsewhere, that it somehow drains it and brings it in. It's just I think you were saying, it's where if it can flow everywhere, that's better for everybody. And it's relative. So yes, I do believe that Bitcoin will always be the greatest market cap because of the basic properties of Bitcoin. Most decentralized, biggest market cap to date, biggest brand, right, on all of these factors. But no, I think once you finally do have these multi-chain environments and everyone gets used to that, and this less tribalism, I think, within these silos, you have these toxic, and there's silos within silos, a DEX on this chain, a DEX on this chain, a SEX on this chain, and so that in these silos you have this toxicity, and that's why we have a lot of this tribalism as well. And so what's the TLDR? No, I know that unlocking Bitcoin, because it has more than double, I think, still of, say, Solana and ETH right now, right? 1.2, 1.3 trillion. That's good for Bitcoin to be able to also bring other liquidity in with no friction. But it works both ways. And so if I'm somebody that thinks that I want to do a specific DeFi behavior, use a specific DeFi tool, but the killer one is currently, in terms of like UI and attention and just like memification, for example, lives on Sol, then if I can't get across there easily, I might not participate. But if I can, then I will. And so I just think it's mutually beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, so I think that since we're talking about Bitcoin, there's also a point that there's existing liquidity that is parked or is sitting somewhere, but there's also a new asset class, or not necessarily an asset class, but a new asset type that is being created. Here I'm talking about meta protocols on Bitcoin, that there is an appetite from other ecosystems to kind of get into what is happening with runes, with BRC20s. So maybe Gorazd, you can tell us a bit kind of how do you see that from your perspective? Like when something new appears in one ecosystem and suddenly instead of copying and trying to do, I don't know, an ERC BRC20, there's just this flow of assets that enables people to kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I think with Bitcoin right now, I mean, people discovered inscription, so there's no clear winner yet in that field. So there's kind of competing standards, and a lot of players competing to be the one that will kind of have most of the Bitcoin layer 2 infra running on it, and most of the tokens, and whoever will be the most popular. But the challenge with Bitcoin is same as with L1 Ethereum, is how do you process all these transactions in a financially sensible manner for smaller investors. So if look at how you purchase a rune today, you only have an auction mechanism where you kind of purchase a bundle of $500, $1,000, $2,000, and for that you'll pay usually like transaction costs around $5 to $10, depends on network congestion. And I see like a lot of protocols see the opportunity of kind of bridging these assets and making them more fungible and tradable in their own ecosystems. Again, it leads to a certain degree of fragmentalization, but it also leads to a better user experience. So I think, again, as with everything, it's the question of liquidity. So either it will be traded on native Bitcoin, and you will have native marketplaces such as now with high gas costs, and at some point a lot of user churn, but it will become sort of a whale game. And then layer 2s or other ecosystems will probably compete for whoever can attract most of that liquidity, bridge it over, and trade it in an efficient manner. So then, as always, whoever will have the best incentive to move users over, that's, I guess, the one that will attract most of the liquidity to his chain or to his protocol.
Yeah, just to that point, I think the example of BRC20 and runes is just a great example, because you're looking at like the first year or first 18 months of these things, these assets being created. And so it's so rudimentary, but you're moving, buying these bundles of things. So then you have to wrap it essentially to send it somewhere else. There's 2 transactions. Okay, you're doing that on Bitcoin. So if it's a high fee environment, like get out of here. Like you really don't want that. We thought 2021 was bad with ETH, but like when this bull really does take hold, like imagine that with BRCs, and it's just not sustainable, it's not scalable. And one example I can give you to speak to how that might work differently is literally via tap. So we have that, because there's more programmability with the base properties on L1, you can do that with us and send batch transfers. So there's a feature called multi-send. So rather than, if I want to do an airdrop on Bitcoin right now, again, good luck, that's going to cost you a lot of money to send to 10,000 wallets, right? Whereas on tap, you just do that in 2 or 3 transactions with batching. And so I'm not a dev, so I'm not going to try and even go into the technicals of how that's possible, but it is happening on L1 today. And so the point being that we look at these other chains that are so well established, and it's like it's embarrassing how much more efficient and cheaper that they are. If you look at Solana, look at the throughput, right? Bitcoin will get there, and things like this will enable that. But right now, it's so early that it's easy to point out, like you did with BRC20 and runes, and say, I mean, BRC20 was just a hack. Self-confessed, that was a hack on Bitcoin. And so, don't judge Bitcoin on that is kind of what I would say.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, again, some very interesting points. And So you mentioned arbitrage opportunities, and I just want to get maybe into a more technical area, in the sense that what is the cost-benefit ratio when we're talking about trade execution? When we're talking, because in the beginning, DeFi was all degens, right? So now, if we're looking at DeFi to being mass adopted, there needs to be like frictionless transactions. And on the other hand, the execution of the trades has to be efficient from an economical point of view, because you cannot, I mean, the large population doesn't understand a lot of concepts. So how do you see it from your perspective, and what are the actual benefits of going multi-chain or cross-chain purely from a technical point of view in terms of trade execution, slippage, and all the good stuff?
I mean, that's a very, very deep question. I mean, the first interesting part is that it's not necessarily cheaper if it's cross-chain. So what's happening when you're doing things on cross-chain, you are still like bound to some specific chains. And currently, like most of the liquidity sits like on Ethereum, which is somehow behind their own narrative of becoming the finality layer of all these L2s, but it's just there. So if you're having a cross-chain environment, you still need to make incentives to spread the liquidity somewhere else, to not have this high transaction fees of Ethereum. So just saying, hey, we move things cross-chain doesn't necessarily bring down transaction fees. What it can do is that you have like an abstraction layer across multiple chains, and you can find faster routes for execution. You can optimize. If people are just interested to say, I want to get out of my USDC position and I want to get into Bitcoin, for example, then you can find them smarter ways than they would normally do if they don't have specific access. So normally what you do, you go to Uniswap, and then you go to your MetaMask and you swap the chains, and then you make the transactions, and that's not very efficient, and it's boring, and it's mundane, and people don't like it. And you can find like best pass payments for people, so stuff like that. The actual solution of splitting liquidity so that you don't have this thing of there's liquidity on chain A, and we can somehow make it that it's as well available on chain B, that's not yet a thing. So this is one major point where people need to work on, probably finding better pathways. But just like having things cross-chain doesn't necessarily bring down fees.
I think also, like, largely because the industry looks the way it does because we have this current AMM design, and the current AMM design largely depends on arbitrage, like arbitrageurs bringing in price information. So also cross-chain arbitrage is largely limited by the AMM design. And I strongly believe, like, once we break out of this, and Uni v4 will hopefully show like a big innovation there, that we can revolutionize the space by designing new DEXs, coming in with hybrid DEXs, but also still sticking to these fully permissionless, trustless DEX design that we have seen with the AMM design. So I think that will really help, like, breaking out of the current space and enabling us to give like new options for cross-chain liquidity.
Especially because a lot of people have lost money on just using Uniswap v2. So there was this promise of, hey, you're making passive income, but most people actually lost money.
I think just on the cross-chain arbitrage thing, and if I speak out of turn here, then please jump down my throat. But I think one of the interesting things about having these chains working together is the difference in block times. So the opportunities because Bitcoin is it a feature or a bug? Well, it's definitely a feature. But these sort of like 10-minute average block times, you can do a lot in 10 minutes, right? But you need the transport infrastructure for that liquidity to move around. And so I just think that, just kind of like I can't speak deeply on that, but just in terms of a concept, that will be taken advantage of, that will be built upon, and there's an incredible, back to the earlier talk about AI, when you can in a wallet speak to it and tell it to do those things, in the next 3 blocks, do X, Y, and Z based on this arbitrage opportunity with token A to token B to token. I mean, the mind boggles how much fun degens can have and how wrecked you can get. But yeah, I'm not a trader myself, so.
I think we need to kind of separate 2 things when we're talking about multi-chain. One is kind of settlement of the assets, and the other one is execution. So I think like you can do really good execution on every chain, but as it comes to settlement, it's pretty much because different blockchains use so many different standards and are not compatible, you will never achieve any sort of even close to atomicity of transactions. So even the case of, let's say, Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? If you want to do a direct Bitcoin for Ethereum transaction, you're going to wait 10 minutes block time on Bitcoin for settlement and probably another 15 minutes to make sure that, you know, there's no orphan chain or you're on the longest chain. Same for Ethereum, you'll wait 15 minutes. So basically, like, kind of atomicity will not work. So you need to settle on native chains. And then kind of settlement is fine, right? As long as you can have like really, really efficient execution. So then the user experience doesn't suffer per se, because the user will still be able to, you know, kind of do his trade, all the arbitrage will work, but the settlement would happen at different points in time. So the ones that users are used to. So, I mean, nobody complains about 10-minute block time on Bitcoin, because just Bitcoin users are used to it, right? And, or 10 seconds on Ethereum is pretty fast. Then ICP has 2 seconds, Arbitrum has like 0.2 seconds. So it's really about the expectation of the user for what he's trying to do. So a lot of arbitrage can run natively on different chains. They are like, you know, Gen 2 faster, have shorter consensus time, can process more transactions, and like the Gen 1 blockchains that have kind of a higher security model, for them it's more like, you know, let's get things done. It'll take a bit longer, but, you know, you can be sure that everything is settled. But you just cannot kind of look for, you know, going from one chain to the other. For that, it's better to use a bridge or some sort of middle ground instead of expecting a transaction from work, like from A to B directly.
I think it's also not largely like where do we want execution and settlement, but also whom do we want to have executing it. And one thing we see, especially in the EVM ecosystem, is now this trend towards the RFQ system and like intent-based trading. And this might be fantastic for the trader, but then actually it largely centralizes the execution in the back, because now there's like centralized parties called solvers actually tapping into the liquidity and settling the trades. And I mean, that's sort of contrary to what we initially started off with like decentralized permissionless liquidity on an AMM, where essentially everyone can bring in liquidity. I mean, it wasn't profitable, but at least we tried to decentralize it. And now the current force we see is really pulling the settlement of trades more towards a centralized party.
Thanks. So since we don't have that much time, I would like to finish up with one very small question. So let's assume that 1 year from now we meet again at ethCC, this time in Paris, with all of us on a panel with the same topic. What do you think would be the hot take that you would have 1 year from now, looking back at the year that has just passed?
A future hot take, retrospectively, that's like a maths exam of a question. I'm trying to figure out how to answer that.
And you have just 2 minutes to answer it.
Hopefully more liquidity and more volumes on ICP.
That's what we want.
I mean, I've been historically often wrong on my predictions, but I'm happy to take one. So one thing that I think needs to happen is chain abstraction, so that people don't have this feeling of, I'm going to this chain, I'm going to this chain, oh my God. I mean, you shut down your computer for a second, open up, and there are like 100 new roll-ups that you can look into it, and you don't know, oh, what's the difference, what's the narrative here, why. You just can't get up with this, and you probably don't care so much. So at some point you want applications that you use and that give you value on everyday life and not just speculation. And at some point there needs to be a solution to this problem, that people can actually use decentralized applications like they use web apps, and not where they don't think, oh, is this hosted on AWS? Is this hosted on Google? Am I actually using Postgres under the hood? Nobody cares about that, and blockchain shouldn't be about that as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, I hope like 1 year from now we can meet and there's like a whole new meta in DeFi with new financial primitives that everybody likes to trade, that give like, you know, triple-digit API and people go crazy for them, and not just the same old copy-paste that we've had for the last 3 years.
I think in 12 months' time, based on the phrase that I like to use, and again, I'm going to come from a Bitcoin perspective, but I think I've spoken about the inadequacies of the infrastructure that exists, but I think the speed at which that's going to be eaten up, because the R&D was essentially done by EVM chains and other kind of chains, I think the speed at which DeFi will take off on Bitcoin, now that we have the ability for sophisticated functionality, cross-chain execution through things like chain fusion, I think it's going to shock a lot of people where we sit in 12 months' time. I think the conversation around like BRC20 runes and how slow and how rudimentary that is, I think that will feel like 10 years away. So I just think the speed at which we see this develop will be my kind of like hot take to the room.
Thanks. I think that's a very nice conclusion to this panel, and I think that's a very hopeful view. So thank you very much to all 4 of you. I hope you also enjoyed it. So thank you.